Please welcome me in joining Ms. Gisela Sanders-Alcantara.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate your introduction. I work on TV and in CUNY TV, and I've been working with BRIC as well, teaching K-12 students. My youngest students had been third graders up to high school, mostly in filmmaking and video production, specifically. But what I'm going to share with you tonight is mostly work that I've done before that. I worked for 4 years with an organization called Make the Road New York. And with them, I volunteered and we organized with the youth group essentially production lessons. And all this with the objective always to create a film about the 1.5 generation, children of immigrants that had, been born or raised in the US, and how was their attachment and their identity, let's say just modified, touched, or, by their parents, and how it was, when they were adapting here. So we produced this film, and that's essentially what all what I'm going to present today is inspired in that period, which was between 2006 and 2009, approximately, that we, again, it was like 3 years of workshop with the students and then the release of the film. And so then just kind of like to get into what this is about, it's about story, and story is something that we all feel that we know, because in every ELA, class, from the moment that you're in kindergarten, you start to learn about the elements of a story, right? And that's what we're going to review today. And we're just going to try to look at the story beyond what we learn in the ELA classes. And so I am going to just really ask you what the story does for you.
For me, stories are super powerful. I think stories are power. It's like the only power that we actually have ourselves. So I think stories are a power tool. And I think for me as a teacher of young people, it's how they start to form who they are. And then when I'm going about meeting other people in different spaces, that's my first access point to them. Like whatever they tell me is what I can go by until I start doing my research. But it's really important to understand that a story is like one person's narrative. There's only one point of view at a time, but it's also that person's point of view. Like, so there's like talk about how a story, everybody has their own story, but those stories can be interpreted. So if someone's telling me another person's story, is different, and it's a different type of power.
When I hear other people's stories, I feel like it creates a connection, and this connection allows for me to think about problem solving and think about, it's something that allows me to feel empathy. And then it gives me education as to other people's experiences. And this is part of what my personal work is about, and how these connections create empathy, and that larger, that empathy will create larger needs to learn more, and helps develop the ways that we live and coexist. So that's what I get out of other people's stories.
Thank you, Jack and Megan. And yes, I mean, essentially, I believe story has been a key historically, right? Has been the key to really access and connect to others, right? And then Megan mentioned point of view. Yes, it's a key to access specifically to someone's narrative. But then when we are, given that story, we have our own point of view, right? And so then, it's a way to marrying those 2 points of view, or maybe contrast them, right? It's a key to start, an interesting path, right? And now that we have this, and I think it is important to underline this, what do we use now to tell a story, to connect with others? What would be the mediums? Anybody wants to go for it? Jackie?
Well, I was just thinking about this like about an hour ago, about how, well, this is one thing that I'm trying to avoid, which is social media, and how I just, I am turning it off because of the way that people are connecting. and they're sharing their stories. And you know how you were saying, like, you can either like connect or just sort of like go and polarize the other way. And it's because, one particular conversation that just happened an hour ago, it was just like polarizing, and I just didn't feel like anyone was listening. And I felt like, well, this isn't a great way to share our stories. So that social media seems to be like a really common way for stories to be exchanged currently. And I'm not saying I like it.
No, yeah, it's definitely kind of like the most popular way to do it. But you're right. It could be, it's a medium that it's iffy in the sense that it doesn't offer, because it's so immediate, it doesn't offer a huge deal of depth, right? And so it's very easy to jump into conclusions. Yeah. Anybody else? Another medium?
I mean, there could be so many ways. Poetry, any kind of active performance. I think even teaching is a form of storytelling, as we take an active decision about what to include and what not to include. And then even like going out to dinner with somebody, or like agreeing to exchange stories, even though that is maybe less performative.
Yeah. Maria Beatriz, you're raising your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, I like I said, I love storytelling, and one new method I've been using is ads and commercials, and I've including that into my curriculum to show the students how you can have a story within a commercial and even a powerful message. For example, the Procter & Gamble advertisements that came out lately. So I think there's so much more out there that we can find a story to tell or talk about, conversation starters.
That's right. Yeah, thank you very much. And right there, we have samples of like already mediums that are already set up, right? But if we just kind of like go backward, more than backwards, if we go kind of like to the genesis, right? How did we ever tell the first story? Jackie.
I'm chatty today. Well, like cave drawings,
That's right.
Yeah. So art,
art. And even, like drawings is one, even, or speech is another one, right? Or, like singing is another one, right? Even, like pantomime is another one. Any performative way, it's a way to tell a story, right? If we start right there, and I think that I really want to as well put another pass right here, right? Meaning, right? When we start attaching meaning to a specific story, then that's when it turns from like a drawing to a message, right? And I think that is as well the motor, our motor, what do we make with that key, when we're connecting to others, right? How do we use that key? What is the meaning that a message has for us? And what is the message that has to that person?
I was just reminded of sort of the gendered aspects of storytelling and how women's storytelling is a lot of times dismissed as gossip. But when I taught sociology, there was like quite a body of research about how really significant that is in making meaning for women, and how sort of like that collective like knowledge building process is I don't know, it's just like really important, but it's always been dismissed, like especially in a, sort of like a more male centered academic, world. So just sort of kind of reclaiming, like, I think women have always been taught that you're supposed to feel guilty about gossiping, or that that's like sinful, but, just kind of like reclaiming how important it is to just talk to each other and figure things out. I mean, I know like I really feel that loss during the pandemic of just like those smaller interactions that I would have with other, like I have a 6 and a 2-year-old. So I'd be at the playground and I would talk to other moms and kind of see what their kids were going through. And so now I don't really have that sense of like what's normal, or, I don't know where to put my experiences in a larger paradigm.
Actually, it's great that you're bringing this up, right? Because we have this element of the story of like who's saying it, right? Which has kind of like one purpose, one meaning, and then how it is understood, either by the person who is listening or the larger, the larger group or the society. And I am very, appreciative that you're bringing this up because, we know we live in a patriarchal society and a lot of things, a lot of activities, actions, performative, even like traditions that were pushed by women were like really under like a huge scrutiny, right? Yeah, thank you very much for bringing that up, April. And definitely, a form of storytelling, a form of, of communication. And I just want to kind of like start kind of like dissecting in terms of like, okay, so language, art are our mediums, right? Meaning or motive or motor, right? And then we start kind of like getting into the story, right? So what do we need? We need a plot, right? We need characters, we need structure. All these elements start to kind of like delve in, right, into what we're going to use to communicate a message, right? And so now that we are right here in the plot, right, it's kind of like touching and kind of like tying into what April is saying into, how some plots might be more valued, or like how in certain circumstances, as well, have a different significance, right? All these are elements that are going to take us to where we're going, right? The set, where these things are happening, the scenes, how we're dividing, or how the story is evolving, how we're using the sequence of scenes, that in the arc, the Aristotelic arc. And I just really want, when I talk about this structure and the rhythm as well of how, like the scenes come in and out, right? How fast or slow we deliver, the information, right? Or reveal secrets, or actually withhold secrets to, keep people in. I really want you guys to how, what's the arc? And as I see the arc, I see something so natural and so ancient. If we even see the sound, how are the waves of the sound, right? We have this, right? Every time. And I just feel that it's something so organic, right? So organic that we just kind of like even waves, we see how they come in and come out. It's something so intrinsically natural, right? But it's definitely kind of like a way to get into the storyteller's lives, right? Their point of view, right? We're going to do a little analysis right here. I would like to see into, and for that, I'm going to ask Marchita to go into the first, link that I provided. We're just going to go from the main, kind of like the dominant point of view that we already spoke about is patriarchal. We know that it's kind of like mono, this is my point of view and this is the main as well. It's there's kind of like a white supremacy point of view in this perspective that Marchita is going to share with us. We're going to actually watch a scene of a film that it's absolutely beautiful. It's really nice. I'm not going to tell you more about it because I really want you to get to the key, because we're talking about how stories are keys, right? I want to see how much you can get from this scene, okay? So it's a 2-minute scene. It's part of a larger film, and now we're gonna pay attention to the film. I mean to the scene, and Marchita is gonna present that to us.
Limak takasag naslash mawi naslaks katan pagsakatang silang katawal was tang silang katas pitli iyima kshka chikin lakadito me silang katawi pagsakanawa. No cruce las manos aquí, cierra los ojos, respira profundo. El Señor está contigo, bendito tú eres entre todos. quiero saber si de verdad existió esa deuda. Esa deuda. Saca 3 cartas de cualquier lado. Sí, está bien. Sí, no hay problema. Tú te sientes entre la espada y la pared, porque tú quieres estar con tu familia, pero al mismo tiempo ahora no sabes qué decisión tomar. ¿Por qué? Porque definitivamente es como si nunca hubieras estado acá, en el aspecto de que el ahorrito que tú le confiaste a tu esposa, aquí no hay dinero. Todo lo que tú mandaste se fue acabando y bueno, ¿cuántos hijos tienes? Y también tus hijos que no trabajan o por qué, ¿en dónde está la fuga del dinero? Tienes que tener un poco más madurez porque tienes un corazón de niño. Exageras en la entrega total con la otra persona. Entonces, lo que tú tienes que entender en este caso, el cariño no se compra, ni la vida de los demás lo puedes controlar. Claro. Finalmente, el que se está destruyendo la vida eres tú. Sí.
Thank you, Marchita. Okay, now I would love to hear from you about, I don't know, reactions about this key that we're talking about, right? What is the film about? What is the story? What are they trying to tell us?
I figured that the man, for some reason, needed like answers. So he went to see the gentleman. I don't know what you would call him. I was gonna say like a shaman or something. I don't know. But yeah, but I feel like there's also a lot of culture tied into that because there's things that people might not know what it is. But I I don't know what else it could possibly be about.
Yes, that's right. I really want to kind of like tie as well this to what April was talking about, right? You were talking about gossiping, something that doesn't have, let's say, the weight of like maybe kind of like a more serious discussion. And I just feel as well the same would happen with sorcery or with shamanism, right? Do people, fully trust a shaman, or like, oh, what are you doing with the shaman, right? It's like part of the culture, right? Of like some cultures, like I think in this case, like, yes, the main character went with the shaman for answers. And I'm going to tell you now a bit about the story. So the story, it's a beautiful film about this guy who's trying to go back to Mexico. And the film is called Ya Me Voy, right? And I wanted you guys to kind of like get this first reaction without much information. Of course, when you see the film with the full information, you're going to understand the scene completely different, right? You're going to have more depth. But this film, what it makes is, it takes the time to really go into the story of this guy, go into the life of this guy, looking at him as this whole flesh human individual that has dreams, that has hopes, that had, some money, spent. I mean, not spent, like saved. And now, his money, according to the shaman, is not existing or is gone or something like that, right? And I think in terms of the story, how this story is going to be perceived, it's going to be perceived differently by different mediums, right? But when we start kind of like, every time that we look at the story kind of like starts to expand. It's kind of like layers into layers into layers. First, the first person, then the person that is listening to this, then the context in which this story is shared, right? And then if this story is shared in a movie theater, what the discussion is about and how this evolves. And then if this story is shared over, social media, how this as well is received, and how the comments on the social media start to being sort of like a trope of, that is supporting either one narrative or contrasting it, or, discussing against it. You know what I'm saying? So kind of like every time that we add a layer to the story is transformed in a way, right? Depending, again, the context, depending on the setting, depending on where it is shown. right? And so it is important that when we think about a story, we think about every single layer of them, you know, from the very simple one, where is the single key, to the double key when we have two individuals talking, to the maybe ring of keys when we have not the two individuals, but as well the setting, and then, you know, kind of like the social setting, and then maybe the social media setting, right? So this is something that I think it is important to pay attention when we're talking about the story and when you're teaching a story to students, right? Now I am going to share my screen because, well, actually I'm going to ask you, Marchita, if you can go to the Instagram, right? After the class, I would like to share with you guys this resources, because I think it would be important that you guys spend a little bit more time into that, you know, because when we look into you know, the site of someone who's showing a film, right? It is important to consider the setting, you know, who's watched this film, who's commenting onto this film, right? And so when we see, for instance, the Instagram of the film, we're going to see who's commenting on it, right? What are they saying? Now, this film is not as, it's kind of like, it's old. So what we're going to find right here is, you know, like something from, you know, very long time ago. So we're going to see the Instagram from Lindsay Cordero, who's the filmmaker of that film. And we're going to see all the images and the, you know, and the likes and the et cetera, which as well, when we're thinking about story in a more macro sense, and we're seeing, for instance, the likes, right? Do you mind scrolling through it, Marchita? So we, and actually, you know, hovering over each one of those pictures, we start to see, you know, kind of like the likes, and it's, even though it's something very immediate, it's going to tell us a lot about, like, okay, this person has how many followers, right here, for instance, the one in the left, right? Las Patronas. You see the guy right there with a hat that actually has to do with the film Ya Me Voy. And can you stop right there with 123 hearts and 27 comments? You know, we kind of start to, people who are very knowledgeable of Instagram start to kind of like to make either assumptions or quick narratives about what is the meaning of those hearts, what is the meaning of those, you know, of those comments, and then, you know, that is going to be definitely part of the narrative that we're constructing about this story, about this film, right? Thank you, Marchita, for looking at that. So I really think it is important to think of story in all these different levels and all these different, you know, layers that we're going to be looking into. Now let's look into, in contrast with this, you know, like someone who went into with a you know, with an immigrant, was with this guy for many, you know, months, following this guy because they were living in the same space in Brooklyn. This guy was working, you know, through the trash, getting bottles to go, you know, make some money. So that's how they get to know the main character, right? And that's how they get to make the film. Now we're going to definitely go into the CNN report, Marchita. Thank you. And with this CNN report, you know, we're just going to understand, you know, where is it coming from? Which as well, when we're looking into a story, this is kind of like a key important element, right?
Another layer of the border crisis story. Over the last 2 weeks that we've been here, starting when you came down here, we showed you where people are crossing the border every day, every hour. But this involves smugglers stashing people in houses. We're in the middle of a nice neighborhood, in the middle of town. In this case, the smuggler was arrested, told police where he'd find the immigrants, and even gave them the garage door opener. Nearly 24 law enforcement agents surrounded this suburban Texas home early Wednesday morning. The deputy chief was just told that there's about 40 people inside. It's exactly what they had been told. Inside, 62 undocumented immigrants, mostly from Central America, and Border Patrol says they were brought here by a smuggler. If you come to the kitchen, It's clear that there was food being made, plates, a lot of flies all over the place, but every inch of tile in this house had someone sitting on it when the agents busted through the door. Do you know what's going to happen to you now?
Yeah, in the court in Mexico.
This woman, who was here with her sister, says she'd been in the house for 15 days.
I have two child. My sister have four. And we don't have any work.
Every one of these people that is being smuggled is paying about $9,000, and that money goes to the cartels and continues fueling this cartel violence.
Every person was given a clear bag for their belongings, then patted down inside the house. They were led outside, hands behind their head, headed to a bus and then a processing center in McAllen, Texas.
The conditions are so bad, they would call 911. That's how we were able to uncover some of these stash houses, because somebody is so desperate to get out that they're willing to call the police and law enforcement authorities to rescue them.
Border Patrol told me that what smugglers will usually do is go on Craigslist or find a newspaper ad. They'll rent the house, and in many cases, the owner doesn't even know what the smuggler is using it for. Heck, the neighbors don't even know. I mean, Vlad, the woman who lives across the street asked us what we were doing here. We told her, and she said, I had no clue. I mean, I live right across the street. And to think that there were 60 people living in this house, one man said he was here for nearly a month. By the way, there's only one bathroom, one shower.
Disturbing details indeed. David Begno for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marchita. Now, I would like to see, this is a huge contrast, right? Any comments about how, okay, Megan?
Yes, this is like, I was immediately moved, and I'm giggling to myself because this is like a direct intersection when we hear and watch media about different racialized communities, specifically people of brown and black communities, where we're talking about, it's not immigration necessarily, but it's like what it means to be black and what it means to be, you know, poor around the country. And another thing that has brought me to, in different parts of the world and even different regions of the US, these stories are covered different. Like in the story of immigration, they use different language, different images, and different intent. I remember when I was in Miami, there was a Cuban man who was stranded in the water. He was coming from Cuba into Florida, and all the news was on. They're like, we're gonna rescue him. And I was like, whoa, they named it as rescuing. And I know if that was in New York or Texas and even parts of California, the narrative is just totally different for many reasons.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. Yeah, that is definitely true. You know, like the intent, you know, like how things are portrayed are completely different, right? Anybody else has comments about what we just saw in terms of like contrasting, you know, these two stories? Jackie?
So that location is where I had a 2-month residency, and I was in Mission, Texas, which is not, it's about 15 minutes from Edinburgh. And my project began down there, my immigration project, where I did these long form interviews with people that were part of the Rio Grande Valley. And I felt the same exact way as Megan saying, is that simultaneously I was listening to NPR and hearing Steve Bannon trash McAllen, Texas, saying it was full of crime and the cartels. And I'm like, literally driving to my residency, and I'm like, where? Like, so you know, it was alarming to me how you can be so disconnected from the larger story, which led me to not edit the long format interviews. Like, I personally feel like I couldn't bring myself to edit them because I felt like everybody's story, when the media would go down there, they were there for a specific story, would edit it down to support their story. And then the whole context of everybody else's experience was lost. And I grapple with that because I know I don't have the attention span of like viewers for an hour each person. So I don't know. I don't know really what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, like, I completely agree with what was just said. And I not only do I agree, I think it's totally valid.
Yeah, thank you very much, Megan and Jackie. And yeah, I mean, it's a completely different way of approaching the story, right? And as well, the individuals that are in the, I really hate to say subjects, because I feel that subjects, it's already, you're like reducing an individual to a subject, right? That it's part of your study, and so kind of like there's a power relation anyways, but I do feel that there's a completely different approach, right? When Jame Boy, we see the sight, not the sight is not the right word, I just translated it straight from Spanish, la mirada, kind of like the gaze, right? The gaze of the filmmaker, who is really curious about the livelihood of this individual, right? Who is him? What does he believe in, right? How is he moving through life? What are his interests? And in the CNN report, we see kind of like a pack, and then how they are referring to the individuals, right? How they are even, CNN is kind of like putting them like in a cage almost. It feels like cagey, right? Like they're all like on the floor, like all like cramped together, right? Like there is no humanity, just as you said, whatever is serving the narrative, right? They are in here. We don't even, what are their names? What are their specific stories? We just don't know. Boom. It's kind of like a blanket. Boom. Everyone is the same. Everyone, and actually the concerns are like, oh my God, they're in a nice neighborhood, right? And people didn't even know it was existing or it was happening here. Now they might feel threatened, right? And right here, we're kind of like right in front of using a story, not to use the key as bring this other point of view, but to support my own point of view, to talk to the person who thinks like me, right? Just kind of like just supporting my narrative without really the real curiosity to access with this key into the other person's point of view, right? So I think it is important to think about that, in that sense. And the other thing that I really want to say is that I guess for the first time, the US, is placed in this spot where we have this multinational, not multinational, multi-ethnic, and humans from everywhere in the world in this same spot, trying to have a dialogue, right? And we were used to this European truth, science has the truth, our perspective is the dominant, is the right one. And then in this time and age, we start to see that there are other truths coming to the surface that are not less valid, but just as valid, right? And so the conversation is starting to shift. And so then the truth, you start to see how it's really, there is not really one truth, and there is not really one story, and there is not really one narrative, but different perspectives, different narratives. And we really need to start we have to start creating conversation about agreeing into understanding that we have different perspectives, and that there is not one truth, and that there is not one story, that they're all different, and that we need to be aware and respectful of people's points of view, right? Understand that reality is not solid and static, but it's fluid and changes depending from where you're standing, right? I don't know if you have any thoughts, any reactions about what I just said. Yeah, Megan, you wanna?
I'm so sorry. I'm feeling very chatty today too, Jackie. But I remember when a lot of the Black Lives Matters protests started happening, I felt it was particularly important for me to try to understand white supremacy more. I identify as brown. On my census, I mark off Black, and all for very political reasons. And I started watching documentaries and reading about, like, through a white supremacist lens. I am trying to understand. And I think that is very powerful too. Like, I work in a school and I talk a lot about equity with my teachers and with my colleagues. And a lot of them, they're white, affluent, or white, not from New York. And it's always really interesting having these stories. And me and Jen, I don't mean to like put our stories on the spot, Jen, but like, we've spoken about colleagues and how it's really hard to talk to colleagues who don't have exposure to diversity or don't have that open mind to it. And I think even on the other side, where I'm trying to push, solidarity for everybody. It's important that I too recognize that there are other long like legacies of narratives that have been passed down. Not that I agree with them, but and not that they were like justified, but for them they have been taught. So I'm like constantly conflicted, like how do I blame folks who just don't get it, and what do I do now? So it's like constant trying to figure out the other narratives, but trying not to make excuses, but just trying to be empathetic at least.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, April.
It was just kind of reminding me, I had a moment of reflection this past week with teaching remotely, because I've been feeling really kind of frustrated, and a lot of teachers have been having dialogue about students not having their cameras on, and how you feel really disconnected from them when you're just looking at all these icons, and it's just like, what am I even, like, are they out playing basketball? Like, you just have no idea. So you know, I've kind of been struggling with that, but then I had my students upload these short 2-minute videos to this site called Flipgrid. And then we were kind of dialoguing about, you know, did you like it? Were there any problems with the process? And then a lot of them mentioned that just trying to find 2 minutes where they could upload their video without being interrupted was really hard for them. So I think that just kind of reminded me of, you know, just like assuming a positive intent, like even when they are not on camera and muted, that there is a person there who's, you know, trying to engage in the learning, instead of just feeling like so disconnected and, you know, like that maybe that I'm putting in more work than they are. So I don't know, I think that kind of relates to what Megan is saying, but then also just like a lot of the, you know, the crowded conditions that we're living in, where like having like total peace and quiet would be really like a really big ask that I, you know.
Thank you, April. Jen.
Yeah, April, I totally agree with you. And Megan's putting in the chat that it's a matter of equity also, as I'm observing lots of classes around the district, and in some of the classes, the kids could be there, but there's no one there. It's complete remote. And the teacher is trying to engage Flipgrid, Nearpod, all these different applications to check in with learners, and people are reluctant to do it. The screens are blank. And when the kids unmute, you're hearing chaos in the background. And there's such a disconnect between the teachers and the kids, because this summer when we wrote our opening plans, they demanded an online etiquette policy. You know, this policy was going to make the kids present online. And it just has a total disregard, and I did it, I wrote it, but it has a total disregard for what their lived situation is. You know, every child should be sitting in a quiet room. There should be no distractions. The camera should be on. But if you're embarrassed of where you live, if you're watching your little sister while your mom works, if you're 10 people in a small apartment, it's just, the intentions behind the policy were not bad. They were to get more kids engaged in learning and to let them know, this is what we want from you. This is how we're going to learn and teach together. But we didn't think past, like, why are they actually not turning their cameras on? Why are they quiet? Why are they disengaged? So it's been really eye-opening.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much for bringing this up. And I think Jan, you said something key. They're embarrassed, right? And why are they embarrassed? Because the dominant culture has said this is what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You know, being in a crowded space is not acceptable. Why? Why is not acceptable, right? Why the only way to learn is to be isolated in a quiet space in front of a computer? Yeah, Jack.
Chatty Jackie is back. Back to the social media thing. Everything, I mean, every single morning, everybody turns on Instagram and their life is supposed to look like that. I mean, I literally teach about this in photography from the get-go. I'm just sort of like, how has, I mean, in that intro get to know you session of the first classes, it's evolved from 10 years ago to now, like, why are you here? And it's like, mostly people are there because they want to get better at posting photographs on Instagram. And like, that's like such a 360 or 180 from when I started in 1990 or 1980. When I wanted to be an artist, I wanted to cope, I wanted to express myself, and I was weird. Whereas Instagram is just this like perpetuation of the ideal. And so in one of my classes, it's such an antiquated film, but its points are relevant. It's called Ways of Seeing. It was put together for BBC by John Berger. And he evaluates all of these European like attitudes that are put upon us, and how we view vanity or advertisements or women. It's just been put upon us. And what I think, and I always point this out to my students, is that I was like, this was literally made in 1972. And like everything he speaks to is still happening in 2020. Now, what do you say about that as a photographer? Like, are you going to adopt these things just because we continually see imagery that points us in that direction? Or are you going to contest it? Are you going to think about the construct, and are you going to oppose it? And the one thing that they didn't have back then is the internet. You know, when I think about borders and back to immigration, like part of my overall thinking about that is like borders are like such an old way of thinking, considering we can speak to people so quickly and freely in other worlds, like across the world. I can find out what's going on like now, and we didn't have that. So we have no excuse for like having like a closed mind about the differences of how people live. And just one last thing, I literally was in a faculty discussion yesterday, a meeting yesterday, where my chairperson was saying, videos have to be on, you know, you have to insist upon it. And I was like, yeah, I kind of had my foot put in my mouth when I told my student that he needed to have his video on. And when he later told me that his entire family was living in a hotel room because they were kicked out by the landlord. And I'm never going to do it again. I'm never going to do it again. I mean, I will be happy to privately meet with them to see if there's something we can do to accommodate, but equity is huge. It's definitely about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I think the underlining element here is really multiple truths, right? Multiple stories, and keep an open heart to those keys, you know, to those points of views, not to kind of like detach ourselves from the dominant perspective where this is the right way and this is the only way and this is backed by science. Because just like in the past, you know, we use religion so much of like, oh, you know, the Crusades. And I think the new religion right now is science, right? Where people, you know, believe blindly on science because science proves over and over. And actually, if you have a study that doesn't fit your narrative as well, you take it out, right? Happens exactly the same way in science, right? Science has become the new religion of, you know, of these last times, right? Because, you know, because you can use your reason, which is only one way of approaching the truth, approaching a narrative, approaching a story, right? And in reality, you know, I mean, when you start to open up to the possibility of multiple realities, depending on where you're standing from, you're as well open up to you know, to access different points of views, you know, and be respectful of other points of views. Now we're gonna do an exercise, guys, and in the exercise, I'm gonna ask you to, with all the, you know, what we just spoke about, you know, understanding that there are different truths, understanding that there are different layers into the story, right? Different layers within the story. Many times when you go deeply into how ELA looks at it, into kind of like, you know, all the elements of it. And as well, when we get from the individual story into the larger, you know, perspective of the story, right? When we see all those layers accumulating. With all that in mind, I'm going to ask you to do an exercise of making a story, right? Of starting to build a story, right? And giving your students the agency and the authority to speak for themselves, right? So in this exercise, we're going to start by using a reference. You know, again, I'm going to go back to the film that I did with these amazing students. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the film. The film was produced between 2006 and 2010 with a group of about 10 to 15 teenagers. All of them were very interested in film and media making. All of them are now adults. Some of them are still involved in media making, some others are not. But we're going to look at this last scene of the film. And just so you know, so you understand that last scene, what has happened is that they already, you know, went through maybe 3 years, the same group, of exploring, you know, first is short films, then films about other things, and then finally, after a lot of like pulling, they agreed to make a film about themselves, you know, because my main objective was to get into the personal narrative, right? To talk about themselves, because many times they really don't want to talk about themselves. So finally, they agreed to talk about themselves, and we're not going to look at their films, right? We're just going to look at what happens at the end, right? They're finally watching a film that they're a part of, right? Right there, you see all of them at the Quad Cinema. You know, it's the first time that they're presenting their film. So we're going to see that last scene and the Q&A.
Para mí, y soy lo que soy, y siempre llevo en el corazón de dónde vengo, para dónde voy y en dónde estoy.
I learned how to use a camera, and like I had said earlier, it's not just like go record and that's it. Like I learned the actual process of a film and how difficult it is. And with that, I learned not to buy bootleg DVDs. Camacho.
Para mí ha sido una magnífica, experiencia de aprender de lo que las profesoras nos han enseñado, entonces compartir y transmitir unas pequeñas experiencias.
For me, filmmaking has been one of the best things that has happened to me lately. It's empowering, it's a healing process, and I like to express myself, I like to share my stories, and I like to hear what people think about them.
Thank you, Marchita. Okay. So I wanted to show you this because telling a story has a performative aspect to it, right? As we all agreed, right? So right now I'm gonna ask you guys to use, I mean, in all of the cases before, all of them were using, their story started with an object. That's how we started the process, you know, an object. So I'm gonna ask you right now the same. think of an object that it's reachable right now within you, you know, so we can make this exercise. I'm gonna give you an example right now, you know. I'm gonna write what I read before. Okay, I mean, what I wrote before, so you kind of like understand what I'm asking. I have my abuela's comal, a flat pan. In this flat metal disc of about 30 inches, I usually warm my tortillas when I go to eat. Tortillas are a staple in my house. I use this comal every day and it gives me such comfort to have one of my abuela's cooking tools in my kitchen. I'm cooking today with it, and I feel it has more power as a cooking tool because it was hers. I remember as a little girl turning tortillas on this very comal, having 3 tortillas on its slick surface at a time, looking eye level at the blue flames bursting off the stove into the bumpy dark back of the metal. I remember seeing my tias play with the fingers flapping the tortillas on the hot comal, and I admired their bravery to dare to dance their fingers on the flames. I got the subject when my mom died. When I came back to New York, this subject brought a lot of the past into me. Warming tortillas in these comals show my kids the very tradition I learned growing up. It's a way to pass myself, my past, and my identity into my kids. A way to enrich their lives. So that's what I did, and this is the example, and I wanted to share it with you. I'm gonna ask you as well the same. We're gonna do a little exercise because sometimes when you are like put on the spot and it's like, okay, boom, go grab an object, you're like, oh my God, wait, what? It's hard, right? Because then you start to think, you start to rationalize, you start to kind of like look into a lot of buts, right? So I'm gonna just ask you guys to bear with me and work with me as well using this technique, okay? We're gonna use a technique where we're just gonna close our eyes and we're just gonna go to a place of comfort. Place of comfort and the place that make you unique. And that moment is very present. And now go into your bedroom or wherever the place where you feel better. Go inside, and what did you see? On whatever you see in your bedroom, the first thing that comes into your eyes that you know exists is what you're going to write about without much thought. You're not gonna put any rationing on this. You're just gonna take it as a present from your own self. That's what you're going to write about. Whatever came to your eyes, in your mind, I mean, because your eyes are closed, whatever came first, that's it, no doubts, okay? Now, I'm gonna give you guys 10 minutes to write about it. Describe the object, why you choose this object, what is the attachment, what sensory memories are triggered, what emotions does this object bring to you, how did this object get to you? What did this object tell you about your identity or your difference, whatever it is? What makes you unique? So I'm gonna give you again, first 5 minutes to write about it, you know, to have some sort of a body. And after this minutes, I'm gonna ask something else. So now, since we know that story is performative, how do you guys feel about presenting this to your classmates?
I could read what I wrote. I mean, it's not very story like. I was just like reading whatever came to my mind. Okay, here we go. So you had mentioned an object, so I chose my bed. So it says, okay, my bed covered in presents and gift wrap. My bedroom has become Santa's workshop. I should really finish, but I would love a nap. Catch 22. I can't nap until I finish because the bed is covered in presents and gift wrap. I am tired, but my to-do list is long. 3 weeks until Christmas. I love Christmas, but this year has so much more meaning. That's all I got.
Great, thank you, Viviana. And I actually really need to highlight that when we start sharing, in a way, it doesn't really have to have the structure, the Aristotelic structure that we learned, because then that is only one way of telling a story. There is only one structure, right? Every time that we open our mouth to tell about what happened to us, we're actually telling a story. Like what you said is a story. Even though, again, it doesn't have all the elements that we learn in ELA, we need to start kind of like, actually decolonizing a story, right? Because then you start kind of like to see the layers and all the different ways in which you can tell the story, right? So that was great, Viviana. Thank you very much. Anybody else wants to comment about Viviana or want to share their own?
Yeah, thank you for this exercise, because now I'm like, oh, I really, I want to spend more time writing, but I'm also trying to take in what you just said about it not needing to be so perfect. So it's not perfect. I'm going to read it. So the object for me is the photo of my grandmother. So this photo of my grandmother, Grace, Abuela Grace, we never met, yet her photo reminds me that she existed, that she exists. A few years ago, I felt called to visit her grave in Puerto Rico, like she was talking to me. After I visited her grave, ... I didn't finish that part. I didn't have a photo of her, so I stole it from a photo album the last time I was visiting home. I talk to her almost daily and ask her for my protection.
Thank you, Victoria. I just want you to understand that in Viviana and in Victoria, there was a conflict in both of their narratives, right? Oh, should I undo my bed or not? Oh, the raps. And then right here with Victoria, I mean, it's might for, at first glance, it might not feel like, oh, it doesn't have, the conflict, it doesn't have all the elements of the story, but actually, in fact, it does, right? So we just have to start to really trust not only ourselves, but as well our students in their capacities to write, to tell the stories in their own, with their own resources, and really respect the ways in which they can really communicate and they can, speak about them, yeah, so then I want to say that, and I don't know if anybody else wants to share.
I can share.
Okay.
So on the line of like grandmas, when my grandma passed away almost 12 years ago, I inherited her gold necklace that I can't ever take off, because it makes me feel protected and grounded by, and this is what I started writing. The infinite memories I shared with my abuela, the stories and imagination I developed of the Isla de Encanto, the first time my family honored my maturity and leadership in the family, and currently my developing sense of spirituality as I rebel against organized religion and embrace diversity through a sort of Gnosticism.
Thank you, Megan. And do you see there's as well conflict in here, right? I mean, even without really realizing, we're really putting out stuff that, there's always kind of like the situation that you have to kind of like go over a lump, right? And when you do that, maybe it's going to look different, but it exists. It's right there. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Sarah.
My conflict isn't really in the story. It's actually in getting me to write. I hate writing, and I make my kids do it all the time. I'm like, God, I'm such a bitch. I can't believe I'm doing this thing that I would hate doing. But here we go. So this is the book Eloise, and it's the first edition of this copy that my mom bought home. So I didn't really write anything. I'm just going to say it. So my mom bought it home from the library bookstore. Probably cost a nickel. Somebody else had written there. And like my story is told as I'm flipping through the book. These are like, I'm seeing my story. So somebody had written their name and their address. So here's my little 4-year-old handwriting in there. I wrote my address there. This was like very quickly my favorite book. I was not a rich girl who grew up raised by a nanny in the Plaza Hotel, but I identified her because she was messy and clumsy and she had really goofy, stringy hair. So I totally identified with that. I remember this book didn't have the book jacket, but when I found it later and it's in color, she had blonde hair. It was super disappointing for me. And then as I'm flipping through, I remember, so this is my favorite page. It talks about how she runs up and down all the escalators and all the flights of stairs throughout the hotel. And when I would read it, literally every single time, there's a dotted line and I would trace it. And then like 5 or 6 years ago, after Thanksgiving, I grew up in Connecticut and my mom, she's like, we're going to the Eric Carle Museum, which is in, I think it's in Amherst. It's somewhere in Western Mass. And she took me because Hilary Knight, who's the artist, was there. I also have all the first editions, all the editions. I have them in Spanish and in French right behind me right here. Literally the only thing I collect. But he's like, the man is like, he was like 90 years old or something, the artist. And I asked him if he could sign it because he was doing a book signing, and he signed it on my favorite page. And it says, this is from Sarah, from me, Eloise, and Hilary Knight. And so just like looking through this book, that's how, like, books are my stories. I'm not a storyteller, but I am a story like sponge kind of.
That's great. I love Sarah. Thank you very much. And I think, Sarah, you got into a really key point. I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer too. I am actually, I'm a horrible writer. And I have to say, I was very insecure and hesitant about always my writing, and oh my God, no. But, eventually I learned to structure a story. I became aware, and how? Because of images.
Yeah, that would have taken me 3 hours to write if I actually had to type it. I'm not
yes,
kidding.
Exactly. And
I would
so
have to get
because
a
of
snack,
that,
I would have had to, yeah.
Yes. And so because of that, when you're working with your students, if you know that your students are not gonna, they're gonna be aversion to writing, then other medium, tell me about your object, photograph your object, draw your object, perform your object. And just along those lines, I'm actually gonna share my abuela's comal. Okay, there it is. Do you see it? I'm going to share now a little video of actually that memory that I was just telling you guys about, right? Let me just share screen again. And it's right here. So there is that memory, right? So any medium that your students feel more comfortable with, that's a medium that they could express on, right? And so this is important. If kids can't write, don't torture, right? So any medium, and start with that, right? We're going to start with that. And as we really kind of like are aware of the different layers within the story and outside of that single story, into the setting and into the larger, scope, again, social media, or even my town or my city, it's important to kind of like dissect into that, and stop every time that we get into a new layer, and create awareness. Okay, right now we're in the layer of the group. Right now we're sharing, and what are the inputs of the these different individuals. And let's become aware of how these individuals and these voices are becoming the troops of my story, of my narrative. Some people might say, oh, I feel the same. My grandma too, we're all in the streets of grandmas. Or, oh my God, my family just was so heavy that I just cannot take it. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that I was not sharing my video. So yeah, I think it is important to kind of like every time that we get into a new layer, create that awareness, right? We're into the individual, narrative. Now we're into the group narrative, and how, the voices that are supporting or contrasting that narrative are troops, tropes that are actually, supporting a narrative, right? And then when we go outside of the classroom with the teachers, what are the teachers saying? And then when we go beyond that, into the city and into a system, and again, create awareness of all those layers with your students, and really, especially self-esteem, self-value, right? Because again, we kind of like look back again, kids are embarrassed. Why are they embarrassed? Because we learned that there is only one way, or one better way to live, right? Because we've been learning about privilege and those that are in a disadvantaged home. And where is the curriculum, right? And so then those that are at disadvantage are not going to be able to reach the curriculum. And so then in this case, when we're talking about the stories and we're trying to access using those keys and get to the point of view, we really need to be Hoover aware that we cannot, that student has to be up, not down, that student and I are going to be at the same level, and we're going to be talking as equals, especially me learning from him, right? It's kind of like giving back power to the students, giving back power, because, we've been learning the opposite. In the classroom, who has the power is the teacher, right? Is telling us where to go, how to do stuff. And when we bring trust into the students, right? Into, how to do it, start there, start with your object. And then, and we know that the driving force of a story is the conflict, right? If there is a little bump, it doesn't have to be a huge conflict. And I'm not going to repeat the elements of story because everybody is very aware of, right, of the elements. But if you see a little bump, that's your driving force, right? And then just dig a little bit more right there with each one of your students. Okay? Anybody wants to share?
I guess I have a question because I kind of started a project. Unfortunately, one of my classes got moved to remote suddenly, which is an 8-hour, typically a location-based class, meaning I would take them to different locations in New York City and introduce them to photographic techniques, using it for 8 hours, a new location for maybe their shoots. And now I've been told that I have to go remote for the 8-hour class. And so when it happened in the spring, I utilized all of my skills with creating productions that included media and storytelling, and it was very successful. But and I'm going to try and do that a little bit differently, especially since I'm learning so much through this program. And I realized last week that I just have a student that's kind of in a funk and not receptive. I'm losing him because I think that he's disappointed for all of the worldly reasons. One of which that we're remote again, and another thing, all of these things that I personally cannot control. And I'm really loving that the way that you're posing questions for us to visualize this this meaningful place. I think I'm going to apply it actually in my class. And I feel his reluctance to the sort of ambiguous nature of doing work like this, where you're sort of having to sort of think about how you feel and what makes you comfortable or whatever. And that's not something he's used to. So I'm just wondering what you might do if you were in a situation with like 8 students that are receptive and 1 person who's pushing back, meaning like I did an exercise like this and he was done it within 10 minutes when everybody else needed an hour and a half to do it, just because he was so quick and interested in getting it over with, so he didn't have to face the larger emotional pull maybe. So what would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has to do with rhythm, and as well with, besides rhythm, the rhythm of each of the students. And actually that's something that we're always dealing with as a teachers, right? I mean, who is like the fast and quick and is finished, and the other one needs not only 10 minutes, but a full session maybe, right? And I think in this case, it's like something very specific, and we don't know if the kid is disappointed because of what, or maybe himself, right? He has created his own, I mean, it has maybe nothing to do with you. It's just himself going through something heavy. And yeah, for some individuals having something as ambiguous as that, and just, I mean, because the truth is that I'm trying to introduce here a new perspective. I mean, it's not that new. I mean, it's a perspective that is not, let's say, the dominant, right? Where, when we have the dominant perspective, we have top down, the list of to-dos, and it's very specific and it's very clear. And then there's no room for questioning on like, oh, how to do it. It's like, boom, there's a skill that you're going to learn, right? And there are people who feel very comfortable with that, because then you don't really have to think about yourself or your own doubts, or you just really like that, right? But just opening up to this, style, I would have to, in terms of supporting it and arguing for it, I mean, it's definitely not easy. You're gonna maybe as well find people and individuals who really embrace it, because maybe they're sick of this is what you need to do, right? And I would say maybe with individuals who are resisting, just don't put everything on yourself. It might has nothing to do with you again. It might be himself and his own process. And I would say trust him. Trust him in terms of like his own. I mean, once he knows that he can trust you, trust him. You know what I'm saying? Meaning, at least that's as well what I've been experiencing and realizing with some of my students, that I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? And then I realize that it's, it's the kid just with something completely different, maybe their parents, and maybe that specific moment they didn't have time, or it was just too much. It wasn't a question that was very, I don't know, intimate, or was bringing something, unpleasant, and I would say, in the case of the guy, just reach out to him independently, ask the key questions of like, what's going on here? I know this is, what your face might be troubling, but I would say kind of like create safe space, that we know that by creating a safe space is not only saying we're in a safe space, you need to work to create that safe space, you really need to, assure, and not only assure, kind of like again and again, the student need to know that, yeah, they can trust you, that you're going to listen, that you're going to catch those little details, that they might, because sometimes as well, speaking up something that is so unclear, it's hard, right? Because you don't even know like what you're, like you cannot really kind of like wrap around how to put it in words just plainly, right? So I would say, like patience, and just kind of like, it's like a dance, I just feel that every time that you're gonna go into a project, you always dance with it. Sometimes you use one technique, and if that technique works, you go with it. And if it doesn't, just another technique. And if that, so then you're always kind of like in this dance, boom, 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 and again with the rhythm, So when it might feel simplistic, but I think it works, it works in terms of like really creating awareness as well on yourself, and how to go about with your students, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to share their object?
I can share my object since I was just talking, and I'll make it really quick so I won't have to be chatty anymore. But so you said to break it down into emotion, sensory, how did this object get to me? So I just responded to those prompts, and my emotions felt like, so I envisioned my mother's kitchen, where she and I cook together a lot, and have been since I was very little. And so my emotions felt like acceptance, love, and home. And the sensory, I hear my home, I hear the music my mom plays and listens to, I hear the television my stepfather watches. I smell my mom, I smell the dinner she cooked, the bread we always have, the smell of anise, the smell of cookies, the smell of the dough. And how did this object get to me? Making the same Christmas cookies we have made has always been a tradition for me and my mother every year, something I share with her in specific. I associate it with my ancestors because it's their recipes, and I correlate that with my mother and my identity. It is my annual reminder that I'm an immigrant, and that the very struggles of my ancestors have allowed for my mother and I to have this time together where we talk about memories and the origins of the recipes in our lives. And back to that gossip thing, we spend a lot of time talking about, we have the like chit chat about all the things that we're concerned with, which is sort of like gossip. And that's as far as I got.
Thank you very much, Jackie. It's really beautiful. It's really nice because it contains a lot, right? It contains the past, it contains your present, right? Definitely. And as you said, the gossip, the stories that are within the story, right? All the cooking, and all the sensory that you brought up is really rich, right? And again, in terms of ELA, story, that's essential to build a good story, right? Bring the sensory in. And with your students, I would say, this is key, sensory, because when we are very much into our minds, the why, the what, all the W questions are very rational, right? And those are essential for comprehension. But to connect, the sensory is your key. How does it feel? What color is it? How does it taste? How does it smell? And that connection doesn't go through our mind in terms of like passing, like series of judgments or like what does it mean? It just kind of like comes directly as well through our sensory, because sensory is something that we all share as humans, right? I mean, we all feel touch, we all hear music, maybe different kind of music, different tunes, but we all, have access to that sensory, right? So that's why sensory is key. Sensory is key when you are calling that object. And again, when you are building a story, it doesn't necessarily has to be written. Again, it could be a series of photographs. It could be even songs, songs that they can come up with, things that are really coming from them, right? From them. So it is important to be uber respectful and let the rhythm of each student come up, not to pressure too much as well, because sometimes you can hinder the process when you're like, okay, where is it? Where is it? And it's hard. We go back to the dance, like, oh my God, am I letting that student, abandoning them, or am I respecting his rhythm and he's uber slow, right? Again, is the dance and just checking in with your student, right? Anybody else wants to share, or anybody else has okay, Maria Beatriz.
Hi. I'm sorry, I turned off the camera because I'm on my phone and sometimes I lag. Yeah, I wanted to share. So this is what I wrote. I wrote, and it was hard for me. I'm thankful that you said close your eyes and take yourself somewhere, because I'm not at home. I'm somewhere where between four white walls. So I'm glad I was transported to my home, and this is what I got. There's this painting, graffiti in my room that I really wanted when I visited Chicago one day. And to my surprise, my husband gifted this to me for anniversary. It embodies me because of the colors, the yellows, orange, reds, blacks, blues, the emotionless faces of Boba, the stormtrooper invader, over the Sgt. Pepper bodies of the Beatles breathes life and death, peace and war, love and hate. This represents life, and it brings me joy. So I thought about, like you said, what emotion brings, something brings to me, and this is what popped into my head.
Thank you, Maria Beatriz. Thank you. It's really nice, the graffiti and the colors, right? Now you're like other sensory, right?
Sensory. I went to, exactly.
Right. And the visual as well with movement. I just feel, kind of like the colors, like coming in, and the graffiti that as well represents such a vibrant, because you're talking about yellow and about, so for me, it's like a lot of movement without it moving. I don't know if I am expressing.
No, you haven't seen exactly what it is, because you have complete movement with the colors, and then on top you have these faces of Vader and the Stormtrooper and Boba that have no movement at all, and everything else is kind of moving around them. So that's what popped into my head, and it actually brings me joy. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Great. I am so happy that, you guys are actually bringing things of your own, because as well, when you feel good about yourself, you're way more creative than when you're pressured and, and you are like, oh, I'm not meeting the standard, or I'm not getting there. And then, when you start putting pressure on yourself and you start being anxious, and then you're like, your creative is like, tapper. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why I say start with the sensory. And after there's kind of like a whole lot of sensory out there, you know, again, either singing or in writing or in photographs or series of photographs or series of videos. And we start to share with the students, and then everyone is feeling good about themselves. And then they're willing to share more and more and more. Then way after the sensory, then we start bringing the why questions, the W questions, right? Okay, where is this happening, right? What is in here? Because usually in ELA is the opposite. We usually start with the W questions first, and then, you know, and sometimes the sensory doesn't even, we don't even look at it, right? It's kind of like part of the, I mean, I don't even know why we don't really give it the importance it has, right? Because the sensory, some people think it's part of the establishing, right, of defining the character, right? But it's key. It's more than that. It's much more than that in the story. The sensory is really essentially what it's like the meat, right? I mean, if you have like you're gonna eat, you know, like a piece of chicken, you go with the meat first, right? And then you get to the bone. So the bone is like the meaning, the why, the what, right? And the meat is the sensory, right? As that is what is gonna take you along, right? And as well, the sensory, it's much more easy on all of us, because then we don't have to explain why. We're just talking about how we feel. We're talking about what we're seeing. We're talking about what we're hearing. We're talking about all those elements first, right? And as well as making us feel good, because then, you know, we don't have to explain. We don't have to put the why. I would say the why, go to the why towards the end, you know, towards the end, where kids are again much more confident and more they already put everything out, and it's easier to kind of like have kind of like this perspective, and instead of like looking inside into why, you're looking into what you wrote, into the sequence of, you know, photos that you created. You start to look at all that, and that gives you the perspective and understanding into the, oh, why am I feeling like that? Why do I want to say that, right? What is the purpose of this story, right? So I don't know if anybody else wants to share something else or has another comment.
I suppose I can share.
Thank you, Linnea.
My nephews have left, so there is now calm and tranquility here. So I will, before I share, I will admit, when you first brought up this activity, I was like, there's this one thing that I know is like the most important. And I was like, but I could never talk about that. But I think it's a safe space, so I will. And I also have it here just to show everybody, this is my baby blanket, and I'm 30 years old and still own it. So sensory. So I started off with the fact that anytime I would smell it when I was a child, it would always make me think of home. It has holes that match the scars on my knees from falling out of the wagon when I was little. More recently, it would be described to other people as a rag, but to me, it's so much more. It is both the only irreplaceable item I own and the most embarrassing. It brings me comfort and a sense of stability. It additionally, when I look at it, it gives me the stark realization that I am here for a long time, because I recently had to move out of New York, as I only travel with it when I know a new chapter is beginning, and not simply for weekends away. And that's as far as I got.
Thank you, Linnea. And I really appreciate, you know, how vulnerable you were, you know, showing this object that is, you know, as you said, you know, source of embarrassment, but as well, you know, like you're so attached to it. And I know, I agree with you, like when you are showing this part of like your childhood, and you're supposed to be over it, right? It's supposed to be left in the past, and no, there is no reason for that, right? So I really appreciate that you brought that, and yeah, a lot of richness, a lot of sensory, and that's how we can really relate and connect. to one another, you know. And as well as we connect, we expand our palette, right? Because when we hear other people's sensories, we really access other worlds, right? I don't know, I'm gonna go back to Fausto, the guy from the film. I had the privilege to go to his town, to his house, and I was completely blown away about the rich, you know, experiences that were there. The animals that I've never seen, the kuis, you know, or like the hamsters. And for me, it was the very first time, and those hills and the cold in the hills was very unique, and the smell, you know, all those elements for me was kind of like, wow, you know, like, and he was talking about it in his film. And unfortunately, you know, I see that he's looking at his house, and right now he lives still in Brooklyn. He lives in Bushwick, and he is Quechua, right? And so when he talks about his family, he's sad about how his family lives. I mean, how his family live. And so I'm like wondering why he's embarrassed. He's like, but look at how they live, you know, he says in the film. And I just, you know, in the film, I left it at that, kind of like to allow the audience to react to it. But you know, he was so sad about it. And it was, you know, we go back about the same situation of like people being poor, people being in disadvantage. And I just kind of like really want to rock that conception, because there could be a lot of happiness and a lot of richness and a lot of learning in that environment as well, you know? I mean, again, for him, his hometown and his house and everything was a source of embarrassment. But for me, it was like really like, wow. I was completely marveled and completely blown away, because that was something that I never experienced. You know, for me, it was just like, this is amazing. This is really beautiful. And what they were really teaching me, you know, was, and yeah, he didn't have, like, I stayed overnight with his family, and they didn't have a bathroom. So I was completely terrified to go in the middle of the night out into the, you know, into the field. And I had to do it, you know, and it was fascinating. You know, it was absolutely fascinating. And I'm just really want to bring all these questions into the classroom, because you were talking about, you know, into this space with the fellows, because you guys were talking about disadvantage, and we really continue to bring the narrative of like, oh, the poor people that do not have access, and we in that moment we're sort of like devaluing, even without our intention, right, their livelihood, right? So I think it is important to really try to switch and rock that narrative and say like, okay, whatever your reality is, whatever your story is, bring it on, you know, bring it on. Anybody else wants to share their stories?
I'll share.
Thank you, Emily.
When I first heard yours, I thought like, oh, I have to find something that's related to my family, and that was really hard. But I was pulling out like the writer's journal that I use with my fourth graders and flipping through to find a blank page, and I found where I wrote about my plants with them. And so I honestly was tempted to be like, oh, I'm just going to use this writing I did with fourth graders because it's about an object, my plants. But then I decided to pick one plant that I got like a couple of months ago, my bird's nest fern. My bird's nest fern is representative of learning, comfort, connection to the earth, and going with the flow. Keeping a plant is new for me, and caring for a plant instead of killing it is new for me. When I see the ripple of the leaves, I'm reminded of breath and the need to go with the flow. The curvy waves are so different from like the stark straight worry line that I've gotten on my forehead, connecting it to the bridge of my nose. And that was as far as I got.
Great, thank you very much. And you're bringing something alive, a plant, right?
Miraculously, yes, it is still alive.
That's great. And the relationship with the living, entity, a plant. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's something that I'm getting used to. Because usually when I keep plants, they last for like a week. My bed. So when you were saying like go somewhere that brings comfort, that was like the first place that I thought I'd keep it next to the bed. It's got like such a nice, calming presence.
Thank you very much, Emily, for bringing that. And I really want to. All of you have said essentially that if you wouldn't close your eyes and wouldn't do this exercise of like removing from the space that you're right here and then just kind of like going to your house, you wouldn't be able to pick the object, right? And I agree with you. When I am on the spot in a class and you're like, oh my God, what? And you're like on your brain. So that's why it is important to, and with the students it's very hard. I know that every time that I ask my students, okay, close your eyes, and you're like, woo, they're giggling, like, woo, they're like, no, it's embarrassing, and it's actually a process. I remember the first time that I was told, close your eyes and breathe. I was in middle school. And yeah, the first time I giggled. But eventually I went in. Eventually I really started breathing and really went to follow the directions of my teachers. That was a theater teacher, the one that was doing that. I didn't realize at that moment, in the 70s, he was doing mindfulness. He was, okay, breathe, now go to such and such places, right? This is very important. Again, going back to the sensory, right? To kind of like close to the space that you're in the moment and really go to places, to different places, to create story, right? To go into the detail of the objects or the detail of such event or the emotion. And just as right now, I gave you the prompt of an object that it's something immediate and easy, to build a story around. As well, an event could be as well another sample where you can build a story from, right? An event or maybe a person, right? You can start with the details, always with the details, so you can bring the what and the why. And I see it with my daughter, for instance. I'm not, it's so funny because I'm telling you all this, but then when I go with my daughter, I'm like, okay, but why do you want to do this? And we are so used to that mechanism, right? Because that's how we grew up. We grew up always justifying why you need to do this. And but again, at the beginning, just try to stay in this plane, in this realm of like how it feels, kind of like to really bring more and more and more of the story, of their own story, their own point of view, right? Okay. Anybody else wants to share a story or their own writing, even if you don't feel that it's perfect? Or even if it's not about what you wrote right now, maybe another moment or the trigger of another memory. I want to bring an important perspective that, right now we're in the exercise, but because I feel that the exercise kind of like arrived to sort of like, I don't know, people already shared. I really want to bring, because we're looking at the immigrant perspective, and I want to bring another situation that it's many times overlooked. So we're going to talk about disability, right? And disability, I know some of you here are teachers of individuals with disabilities, and I honestly, I have a kid with autism, and for me, disability is it's sort of like part of the new civil rights movement, because I think it is important to really recognize disability as this difference, as a difference, and really give voice and listen, to those different voices. So we're gonna look at a film that I loved. It is a very old film. It was produced in the 70s as well, just like Jackie was saying. That there's like, looks like time doesn't pass, right? Things that were produced in the 70s are still relevant today, right? Even though it's like almost 50 years after. But we're going to look, if you may, Marchita, share, it's going to be the opening of a film. The film is called Crib Camp, and you can find it on Netflix. Victoria is actually nodding, so maybe she's already familiar with it, right? I love this film. I saw it recently, and for me was like, wow, you know, getting to know all those, you know, fearless individuals that were really fighting and were at the forefront of, like, you know, the individuals who are close to, like, you know, like my family, that are close to people with disabilities, what we are, you know, benefiting from, right? Like the school, free school, you know, for my kid. You know, if I was born in, if my kid was born in the 70s, you know, he might not have access to, you know, to the resources that are existent today. And because all of this is because of these individuals that are portrayed in this film. So again, you can find it in Netflix. The name of the film is Crib Camp. I highly recommend it. We're going to see only the beginning of the film. So I just kind of like to add into this film. This film really kind of like changed my perspective about a lot of things. I realize as well that the individuals in this film are still alive today. You know, some of them are in the 60s, 70s, and they're still, you know, fighting for the rights of individuals with disabilities. They're still part of organizations. They're still organizing, you know. And it was amazing, you know. I urge everyone to watch the film. Now, have you, any of you, watched the film already? You can raise your hand, or Victoria, you saw the film. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the film?
I mean, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to what you asked in the beginning about stories. I don't necessarily remember every detail, but I remember feeling so so much love. And I feel like a movie like that could really, it could go either way. Like it could make you feel pity, you know, which I think we tend to collectively as a society feel for people who have disabilities. But the movie just, there was like an overwhelming sense of love and beauty for how much courage all of the people had who kept fighting. So in that sense, yeah, I agree. I think it really was incredibly moving. And I actually, now you make me want to rewatch it because I realize I probably should.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. And, you know, regarding what you were saying, when we're sharing a story, you know, always, again, you know, you have the storyteller and then you have the viewer or whoever is listening to the story. And there are many things that this person, you know, here who's listening is going to feel for this other one. And many of this belong to this person only, to their experience, you know, because, you know, like you said, like some people might feel pity. Yeah, right. And that might enrage, you know, like this guy here, right? Because like, why, right? But this person has to go through their own process, you know. Eventually, you know, they'll feel something different. And as everything, it's a process, right? You're not gonna get, you know, the messages all at once. We all know as teachers, you know, we have to repeat over and over and over and over a concept. So it really sinks in. You know, it's not gonna come at first like, oh, this is what this is about, right? But it's really about exposing over and over and over and over again, right? And so why did I decided to show you this piece, or I mean, this intro? It's because I think it is important to think about what makes us different and unique and then bring that out, right? When we're thinking about disabilities, at least in the educational realm, we're always thinking about how we can accommodate this kid so he can perform better, right? Rather than what is this kid can bring in his own. Okay, he has, you know, he cannot walk, but what else he can do? What are his interests? And then just kind of like take it from there. You know what I'm saying? And I do feel that with my son that was in school, and he was not learning absolutely anything, and his self-esteem was underground, literally, because he felt that he couldn't perform and he couldn't do anything in that setting, right? So he had to be in the right setting. Yes, he had to be in a place where he had to be taught differently, right? And many times as a teachers, I've been there, you know, when you realize, okay, student has a different rhythm, this student cannot be with the rest of these 30 students, he needs another setting maybe, right? And it is important to kind of like raise that and bring that to the administrators, like, you know, this kid needs something extra that in this setting of 30 plus kids, he cannot get. And he's gonna definitely fall behind, you know? I mean, we have the pressure of the system, you know. You as a teacher need to perform for these 30 kids or 20 or I don't know how many kids you have. And right now, even in, you know, through this medium, which is the Zoom classroom, right? Or new setting. How can we succeed in this setting, right? Really by shifting the power, by really letting them out and bringing, you know, really essentially their being out, you know, their presence. Let it be valued. Okay. So, well, guys, I had originally thought that we were going to spend much more time in the presentation, and but we really went over the presentation, and we talk about a little bit about contextualizing, you know, our objects, how those objects are important, and how sensory comes first, and then the why and the what, and how, you know, the story has all these different layers and levels, and the individual, when you have it coupled with somebody else, or like small group, and then every time that we bring a new the individual, or the group grows larger, or, you know, or we go into a different plane, maybe kind of like in the society, we are adding or reducing, you know, we're looking at different layers in the story, right? And it is important to really be aware of how we're playing a role in someone else's stories when we're, you know, supporting their narrative or not, or asking questions or making, you know, faces, and all that is really adding to their narrative, to their stories, right? Just right here, as we were actually presenting, you know, and sharing or stories, you know, each one of us, we're nodding. And so that even this nod is actually adding, right? When I was going to say like, oh, Creve Camp, and Victoria started to nod, and like, oh, so she knows it. So, you know, this is adding as well to this presentation, to my story. I felt maybe a little bit more confident, right? Because she knew it, and I didn't have to do a whole big presentation, right? So, so in short, you know, what I'm trying to say is that we went over my material, and I'm finished. And it's before 6, you know, so it's 5:30, and well, we can keep chatting if you want to talk about, because I would really like to hear your reactions about this, because I think what I'm proposing is a shift, right? It's a shift. And as well, I will understand if you don't have anything to say, because, you know, sometimes when we are presenting, I mean, maybe you already were there, and maybe I would really love to know if what are you doing, you know, to really bring this over, or if it's something very new, like just like how you're reacting, or like what are your thoughts, you know. And as well, when something so new is presenting to us, is presented to us, sometimes we really need a long time to process it, right? Like maybe at first I have nothing to say, because I don't even know, I need to think about it, right? Even that, if you want to say that, it's totally valid, you know.
Gisela, thank you. That was really wonderful presentation. I've seen Gisela speak about 3 or 4 times now, and every time, you know, there's something new that I get out of it. And one of the things that I just want to point out is that, and I think it's obvious though, is that we're not only providing people with sort of an alternative framework, you know, for working with writing and storytelling and such, but it's so respectful of kids, you know, I think, to me. And, you know, I think if more of us would have had that kind of teacher, in our lives earlier, fewer people would be, have such hangups and phobias about writing and talking about their experience and such. It's really a self-esteem building exercise as well. So that's part of my reaction to it. I don't know, whatever other people thought.
I think this is also great work that a lot of culturally responsive education focuses on. We talk about that storytelling piece, and I think at my school we do this a lot. And it's funny that, well, not funny at all. It's nice to see how academia is merging with education in different ways. I know a lot of us work for the DOE, and for me, we don't get to engage in these conversations as much, which kind of sucks. But this is why I think we apply to programs like this. We get to talk about these things, and something that the Crip Camp made me think of, and I've seen it before, but it reminds me of all these kids, how, like, yes, in the US we're behind in many things, we can get better, but it also disturbs me to think about all the kids in other places around the world. Like in Ghana, I lived in Ghana for 6 months, and those kids are literally thrown away. But there is like small schools out there who are trying to protect them. And like Crip Camp, I think, did so beautifully. It wasn't exposing all the disabilities. It was actually doing the opposite. It was showing all the abilities of these people who we have normed or deemed as disabled. And I think that's the power of it when we're talking about differences. And I think it's really important, and goes back, I'm always connecting back to equity, but this is a lot of the work that adults have to do when we're working with kids from places we have no idea. So like when the conversation about the videos comes up, I think as teachers, we have to check ourselves a little bit, because we don't know what these kids are dealing with. And I appreciate some of the educational leaders here saying, we require that because that's what we thought we needed to teach. But understanding now in hindsight, that's not necessarily the thing that we need to battle right now. There's so many other fights that we need to fight in education, and this is one of them, just understanding stories.
And I have a couple like disjointed, this is my brain though, is disjointed. So a couple things, but like we've been talking in earlier about like, the being mindful of kids not having their cameras on. There's lots of reasons why they may or may not have cameras, and we need to be sensitive of that and realize that like they might not have good safe spaces to be. But then sometimes we get so sucked into like the pain of the kid situations, but we have to, and I know it's a little Pollyannish, but like there is joy in their lives. And these are just like a stupid little thing every day when they come in on Zoom. I put a question up. And so when they're all logging into Nearpod, which is a program I use, as they get in, then there's a question they just answer in the chat. And it's like something silly, like, what was your favorite TV show when you were little kids? Because we're learning the imperfect. And so then like they all watch some TV show when they were kids, you know what I mean? And just like, they're still getting to talk about themselves, and it's still something kind of light, but like being mindful of that, but then also kind of linking in to people with disabilities. I thought about that almost a little bit when we watched the video with like the raid of that house with all the undocumented people in there, and they just kind of show them as like not human, and then they talk to that woman real quick, and it's very patronizing, and you see people with disabilities portrayed in the media very often like look at this person who has a disability and they did a thing, and it's like, I mean, it works because I cry, but like they sucker us in. Like we have to, and I see this a lot. Like my niece she's 8, she has Down syndrome, and she has a 10-year-old brother and a 6-year-old brother, and who do not have Down syndrome. And I keep and I've heard this expression, and I see it every time I'm with the 3 of them. Like, if you want to know how to like treat people with disabilities, watch their siblings, because like they fight with her, they kiss her, they laugh with her, they help her, they push her, like they do all the things. They're siblings, but they're like also mindful of that some things are going to take a little bit longer for her. But like just how we see people, and just watch how other people treat other people sometimes too can help us if we're not sure of how we should act and be. But I don't know. That was all of my thoughts from the whole time coming out now.
It really made me think again, like, I guess this week was a big moment for me because I did this Flipgrid thing, but I have a student with autism in one of my classes, and I was, we were showing the performances in class, and I was kind of white knuckling it a little bit because I was asking all the students to give feedback afterwards, and I didn't know, because I don't know them. I mean, I just see icons. So I didn't know how they were going to react or if they were going to say anything. And then they were just like so like incredibly like positive and affirming to him. And, you know, it was just like a really great moment in class. How like they weren't just like, wow, great job, but they gave like very specific feedback. And like so many of the kids jumped in the chat and then spoke up about like what they enjoyed about his performance. So it was like, I don't know, I think a lot of times you just mentioned the word Pollyanna, Sarah. So I feel like sometimes when you talk to the kids, they're like, well, we're not racist, so racism is just going to go away, you know, and they don't understand, like, you know, probably all the people in the 60s thought like they were going to solve all of the world's problems. And then, you know, we still have all of those problems. So sometimes you think like maybe like, are things getting better? Are things not getting better? But at least like, I mean, I seem to have been the only one who was like, oh my God, like, is this going to go okay? Like, how is this going to go? And then they were all like, fantastic about it. They were amazing. So it was really nice.
I can share that something that I happen to struggle with in my honors sections and my AP section is that half of my students are native Spanish speaking and half are non-native Spanish speaking or learning rather. And I always it's an internal battle because I feel like so often I'm like categorizing them like, oh, our native speakers will do better with this activity and non-natives may struggle. And I'm really trying to eliminate that vocabulary from our class because I don't think that it necessarily needs to be distinguished for any reason. And I'm curious if I use this idea of their story and their platform that you've been focusing on this whole time, I think that will help take those things out of the conversation, and it's no longer about what or how we identify them as learners, but how they identify themselves. And I think that having it through this idea of them telling a story, like I get to eliminate any type of categorization or labeling. So I'm excited to try to bring this to my honors and AP sections. So thank you.
Thank you, Linnea. I would like to share something very that happened to me very recently, and it has to do with gender identity. And I was part of a group where we were discussing, you know, just gender identity. And I was sort of like saying like, oh, but, you know, it's something so new. So I don't know how to, you know, respond to somebody who doesn't identify as a woman or as a man or as a they, you know. So then I was just like, kind of like tense and, you know, like I don't know how to respond, and with this idea of like you know, just being very vulnerable with you, right, with something that I was, you know, struggling and dealing, you know, trying to deal with. And then, you know, as I hear everyone else just really sharing their stories, and I see that, you know, sorry, like my family just arrived. And as I hear a lot of parents talking about their kids that are, you know, that are identifying with a different gender than they were born, you know, and they were kids, you know, they were like 4, 5, 6. I was like really like, wow. And just as you know, as Sarah was saying, like if you talk to the siblings of those kids had no issue of, you know, the jumping between one and the other gender, you know, because, you know, kids are much more open. They're definitely the future. We have kind of like created these structures of like, you know, the binary. It's either a woman or a man, period, you know, and there's no other way to understand gender. You know, what do you mean fluidity? You know, for me it was like, oh, you know. So essentially what I'm trying to arrive to, and just kind of like linking to what Linnea is saying, is we are operating under these structures of like, okay, this is how we need to be, right? It's either man or woman, Spanish or English, you know, this understanding or this other one. But when we really open up to the kid sensitivities, that they're much more open, less structured than us, right? We're supposed to teach them the way to go. But at this age and time, we really need to shift and really listen to them, because they are the ones who are actually leading the way in terms of like where to go, you know, like that, you know, gender fluidity that in the kids, it's something so natural you know, that in us, it's sort of like translated into something rigid, like it's either a man or a woman. And then you look at the kids and the kids just flow. They say like, okay, now you're a girl, you feel like the girl. Okay, I'm going to go with it. And I'm going to refer to you as she. Great, awesome. And you see the consistency in the kids doing it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And for us, the adults who are supposed to teach you the right thing is difficult. You know what I'm trying to write to? I hope I'm clear because I feel like I'm rambling a bit. But I think it is important, you know, to again pay attention to that shift. And I love the silences. That's what we tend to, you know, when we hear the silences, we tend to like be like, oh my God, what's happening? No one is participating and there's some anxiety. But it's important as well to give space.
Yeah, so just going off of what you said, I do agree that I feel like the generation of my students, they are more open-minded in a lot of ways. They are more accepting of one another, and you know, be it like their gender, or if they have some sort of you know, like a special need, for instance. I've noticed like with my students over time, I've been a teacher for like, I think this is year like 9. And like with each year that passes, I feel like they are more empathetic in that regard. Like, which makes me happy, because a lot of the kids that aren't, I notice it's because a lot of the things that they're repeating, that they're hearing from like maybe their family members, which I know a lot of kids now in this new generation are like, they're shedding that, you know, it's like, no, that's what you guys think, but that's not what I think. And I love it. I'm here for it.
Emily, you had your mic open before. You wanted to talk?
Well, you know, when you were sharing about that experience, it brought me back to like an experience I had a couple of years ago when I was teaching kindergarten. I taught a student who is transgender, and she brought some books to school that she wanted us to share. And one of the books was I Am Jazz, and it was a book that she'd read like hundreds of times at home with her family. And we read it one day in class, and you know, just thinking about the power of story. And this is like a memory I haven't thought about in a while. But you know, when you were talking, I just remembered seeing her like physically bouncing in her seat, so joyful, so elated to hear a story she'd heard hundreds of times, because she was hearing it in a new space, feeling validated in like in a new way, you know. And like, to me, like, that starting question you posed, like, what is story? And then I think maybe it was Viviana, you said it's power. Somebody said it's power. I don't remember who. But that, to me, that memory came flooding back when you were talking. And I just was like, oh yeah, there is so much power in story, even stories we've heard time and again, to make us feel seen.
And right now that you trigger another memory, I was recently finishing a puzzle with my son. Again, he's autistic, and he just would not stop jumping up and down, you know. And I was like, Simon, just stop! You're just making me nervous. That you know, you're jumping up and down, and she was like, why? You are uncomfortable because I'm excited, you know. So I was just like, you know, faced with that, and yeah, it's very common that, you know, like, oh, someone is like jumping up and down and like just quiet because, you know, you're like disturbing my thoughts. You know, so really, yeah, for some, you know, that might be a little bit too much. So we always going back to the dance of like, yeah, we all have sensitivities, and we need to be aware of like what we can take and what we cannot take, you know, and disclose what's going on with us, you know. Might as well be vulnerable, you know, like some of us are like a bit of dinosaurs that need to kind of like come out of our egg again, you know, into the new generation. You know, I mean, without being, you know, like disrespectful with the dinosaurs, and you know, being all is totally fine and it's totally okay, you know. It's part of a process, you know, and we really need to revalidate each one of our experiences, right? From wherever we come from, politics of location. I love that concept, when we are actually regaining a, kind of like bringing up agency to historically dominated groups, right? I think it is important to, I learned that, politics of location, and I think that is a key concept that we really need to start utilizing, being aware of where we all come from, what we have behind us, And I really appreciate all of you guys being here and being so attentive into this topic that I honestly feel it's pretty obvious, but many times we forget about it, It's pretty obvious that, yeah, we need to listen. And we always, think about that, but we always forget, when we're in front of a classroom. I mean, I've been there, being with the anxiety of like, oh my God, I need to cover this material. I'm not even halfway there. How am I gonna do this, And this kid is just stressing me out because I'm not getting to my goal. But then it's really, step back and kind of like refocus and say like, okay, what's the most important part in here, right? We are going to educate these individuals. And yes, I mean, there's a lot of people that have devoted a lot of time to developing these curriculums, and they are amazing many times. But there are moments where we really need to step out of the curriculum and really kind of like see, okay, how can I bring this kid at least close to this curriculum? Maybe they're not going to get the whole thing, and maybe it's irrelevant for them, to get the whole thing. Maybe for them it's important to get only this part. So then this part is good, and use your judgment, because, there's a reason why you are a teacher. Because you love your students, I'm sure.
I want to thank everyone for participating today. And Gisela, thank you so much. It's always wonderful to have you here. So many people participate in the development of safe spaces like this in which we can discuss issues. And all of you, play your part. But I also want to make sure today that I want to thank someone who's very special and is really becoming very slowly part of the backbone of this program, and that's Marchita Primavera. Marchita, thank you for all your work, for how you have really stepped up and done so much for this program. I really appreciate it, okay? And I know we all do. Omar, do you have anything you want to add to this before we say so long?
Just to say thank you to everyone, and thanks to Gisela for joining us once again in one of these programs. So yeah, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Marchita, for the support. Thank you, Omar, for inviting me. Thank you, Thomas, for always, bringing me back. I really enjoy so much being part of this program. And thank you all for listening. Really, really, I really appreciate. And thank you, Jen, as well. I met you from that first time and at Long Island. So it became a tradition already. And I'm so, delighted and so honored that you still trust in me.
Yes, of course. Okay, everyone, be well, okay? Have a good evening.